This is Dr. Mickey Edwards, lead transportation researcher at the Center for State Policy and Leadership at the University of Illinois at Springfield. And today's talk is Cannabis and Legalization, Crash Incidents and Injury Severity in Illinois. Evidence from 7 years of linked crash and hospital data. Well, recreational cannabis was fully legalized in Illinois as of January 1, 2020, and there is interest in knowing whether there has been a negative effect on our roadways. And this study aims to provide some insights with 4 years of pre-legalization data and 3 years of post. And it's important to note, COVID probably has an effect on these crash data, as we have previously shown with this group, but let's take a look at any relationships that we could find. So we used linked crash and hospital data from across Illinois from 2016 through 2022. And since we were not able to link every single crash to a hospital file, these findings are probably an undercount of the reality on the ground, but the proportions presented are likely the true proportions. A field in the hospital data informs us whether or not each person tested positive for cannabis who was treated following a motor vehicle crash. Since we have no way of knowing for sure, we do not assert that a positive cannabis test means the person was impaired. So we refer to these as cannabis positive crashes. A good place to begin is with the change in hospital charges for cannabis positive crashes over time. Here we see a steady increase in mean charges beginning in 2017, but pretty stable median charges. We also see pretty high deviation in charges, especially beginning in 2019, but nothing really stands out here. When we disaggregate the crashes, we see high deviation again, but also hospital charges rose in 2020 for both groups before falling again in 21 and 22, though the change is more dramatic for the cannabis positive road user. Here we can see that among cannabis positive and negative road users in a crash, there was a bit of an increase in injury severity scores to coincide with the increase in charges. So since this analysis typically uses all road users, let's look at the count and share of cannabis positive road user types. Here we see the drivers represent 64% of road users involved in a crash, in which at least one person was cannabis positive, but they made up 72% of those testing positive. So nearly 3/4 are cannabis positive drivers. And we were curious if cannabis positive crashes varied at all by season. So here we see that crashes disaggregated by quarter for each study year. And we do not see a ton of evidence it does. But it kind of seems like the first quarter of each year, there are generally fewer. Here we see the count and share of all road users involved in cannabis positive crashes across the study period. We see the share, the orange line, really spike in 2020 before being reduced a bit in the succeeding years. We wanted to see what might have happened if cannabis were not legalized in 2020. So here we forecasted what we would expect to see in cannabis positive crashes in 2020 and beyond, given crashes in the preceding years. The blue line is the actual count of crashed cannabis positive drivers, and the orange line is the forecasted count. We see that the true count is higher than what we would expect to see given the preceding years. And we wanted to know a bit more about the socioeconomic status of those involved in cannabis positive crashes. So here we investigate their poverty rate and carless household rate. Beginning in 2020, we see a slight increase in both the average poverty rate and carless rate of those involved in these types of crashes. The averages drop a bit in the preceding years, but remain elevated. And the hospital data contain race and ethnicity information about the person being treated for injuries sustained in a motor vehicle crash. So we use those data to learn more about those involved in crashes. And here we see that white road users were in fewer cannabis crashes than we would expect to see given the preceding data. And here's the counter of that. And we can see the share of crashed black road users was quite elevated relative to what we would expect given preceding data. And here are just the numbers across race and ethnicity, along with the forecasted numbers and the 95% confidence intervals. So to put some statistical weight behind this, we specified a binary logistic regression model of cannabis positive drivers involved in crashes. And some top line results here. The model estimated that an increase of one cannabis positive crash measured annually per 1 billion VMT and aggregated at the county level was associated with a 1.033 or 0.033% factor increase in the likelihood that the additional crash took place post legalization. Or, put another way, there was a statistically significant yet weak effect between additional cannabis positive crashes and legalization. In essence, the binary logistic model was able to predict that the post legalization period tended to have more cannabis positive crashes relative to the pre legalization period. These findings are consistent with other reports on the subject, such as the annual cannabis report. The model also estimates that more severe injuries are also significantly correlated, yet also weakly affected by legalization. All right, so what does all of this mean? The findings presented here suggest post-legalization periods tend to have higher rates of cannabis-positive drivers and crashes when aggregated annually and normalized per 1 billion VMT at the county level. While statistically significant, the effect appears to be weak. As investigated and published elsewhere by this research, COVID restrictions led to a 13% reduction in VMT across Illinois and a 25% reduction in the number of people involved in crashes. Yet the share of linked fatal crashes grew from 0.139% in 2019 to 0.218% of crash victims in 2020. As that research shows, elevated rates of risky driving behavior in 2020 likely contributed to an increase in fatalities and severe injuries, including an almost doubling of the share of those unbelted or unhelmeted. Substance use in crashes also increased in 2020 by a factor of 1.8 across all intoxicants, including polysubstance use. It was also shown that crashes from COVID-related restrictions had a disproportionate effect on the impoverished and minority groups. Many other research papers found similar increases in risky behavior on the roads, especially speeding. This all implies the increase in cannabis-positive crashes may have been part of a broader society-wide increase in risky roadway behavior during the first COVID year of 2020. Gradual liberalization of cannabis regulations and metered opening of dispensaries across time might have helped dampen the effects of outright legalization. Still, despite fewer opportunities for cannabis-positive crashes, there were fewer crashes overall in 2020, the count of all linked road users involved and the count of cannabis-positive drivers increased. So, whether due to recreational legalization, the effects of COVID-19, or likely some combined effect, the prevalence of cannabis in crashes increased beginning in 2020. Yet, whatever the forces that were responsible for a marked increase in cannabis-related crash factors studied here seem to have begun a slow retreat through calendar year 2021 and 2022. Additionally, follow-up research is necessary to monitor these crash factors for calendar years 2023, 2024, and beyond. Language in the 2021 bipartisan infrastructure law directs the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or commonly called NHTSA, to draft regulation requiring new motor vehicles in the U.S. to be equipped with impaired driving prevention technology. Though NHTSA has no hard deadline for issuing the regulation, and it is unclear how far the agency will take its authority. Important to note, impaired driving detection technology installed in motor vehicles does not need to be limited to the detection of chemical presence of an intoxicating substance. The opportunity is present to improve upon the typical ignition interlock commonly installed for those with impaired driving convictions. Technology is available that detects any type of driver behavior or action that is deleterious to driving skills, like drowsiness caused by fatigue or even distracted driving. Yet even the toughest of regulations blocking impaired driving from occurring will do little to stop impairment among other road users like pedestrians, cyclists, and even passengers. Still, the implementation of such prevention technology would undoubtedly save human lives.